My guest today is Luca Pasquariello. He is a dietitian, exercise physiologist, and performance coach specializing in evidence-based movement for brain and body health. I had the pleasure of meeting Luca at the 2025 Neuro World Retreat hosted by Drs. Dean and Aisha Sherzai. And he not only presented, he also led fitness workshops that bridged neuroscience with practical movement routines. And today, we're going to be talking about all things nutrition, the science, the myths, some of the key studies that we want to be looking at, and what you can do to make sure you're taking care of your one and only beautiful brain and body. So, it is my pleasure to introduce you to one of the most humble experts I've ever met. Welcome to Happy and Healthy with Amy, the brain health podcast for women in midlife who want to not just survive, but actually thrive during the menopause transition and beyond. I'm Amy Lang, master health coach, best-selling author, and daughter of Alzheimer's, and I'm here to help you make this next chapter of your life the best one yet. Hi, Luca. I am so glad to finally get you on my podcast. We met probably a month and a half now, back in San Diego. And so I am just thrilled to have you on the podcast. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And I'm thinking we can maybe just start with, for folks who don't know you, I met you through Drs. Dean and Aisha Sherzai at the Neuro World Retreat. But can you tell folks a little bit about yourself and what it is that actually gets you out of bed in the morning?
Love the last question especially. Well, thank you so much for having me on, Amy. It's an honor to be on your podcast, and it's always great to see you again. And I'm so glad that we actually met in the retreat like 1.5 months ago. It feels like longer since the retreat happened. So for those folks listening that don't know who I am, I'm Luca. I'm a dietitian, basically, with interest in fitness as well. And that's also what I do here in Switzerland, like my home country. So I'm self-employed and I've been studying nutrition for a really long time now. And yeah, trying to understand what I think is a very complex science, which on the surface, it doesn't seem like much. But when you start digging deeper, the deeper you start digging, the more you feel like, oh my gosh, I can dig this hole forever, and I feel like there's always something new, a different path that, starts to get stuck up, basically, because it's a really, complex, and you feel like the more I know, the more I know that I don't know, basically.
Yeah.
So this is also what gets me out of bed alongside of, from a job perspective. But of course, I also have a life outside of my job. I love eating healthy. I love working out. And what I especially love is socializing with the people that I dearly love around me. So that's what brings me out of the bed every morning, I guess. And of course, being also grateful. Grateful to be healthy, grateful to enjoy my time with my loved ones, and grateful that I can also move my body, because that's certainly not a given.
Yeah. So I don't know if folks heard, but you're in Switzerland right now. I'm in California. So thank goodness for the internet.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
so I think maybe we could just start off with like a very basic thing, which is when we talk about a healthy eating pattern, what what do you recommend? And then I think from there the follow-up would be what do we want to avoid and why? But let's just start first with the what would you recommend?
Yes. So what we usually recommend, and that's basically really boring because I always tell my clients like, your grandma was right. Like, just listen to your grandma and you will be more than fine. So, what we usually want to see is a diet that is kind of like filled with tons of whole plant-based foods. It doesn't have to be exclusively whole plant-based foods, like the science is clearly pointing towards a plant-dominant diet. So these foods consist of nuts, seeds, legumes, whole grains, vegetables, and fruits, of course. That's the basis of your diet. Now, whether you want to add some animal products on top of it is, of course, an ethical and an environmental question that you have to ask for yourself, that you have to answer for yourself. However, there's many different dietary patterns, and that's the beautiful thing about nutrition, personally, that there's no be-all, end-all diet out there that beats them all. Yes, the dietary pattern that we would like to see and that has been associated with great health outcomes wherever you want to look at is a plant dominant whole food diet, basically. The rest is totally up to the individual, and yeah, that's basically what we would like to see in a healthy dietary pattern.
So right now, like the carnivore diet, paleo diet, there's a lot, and then there's like weight loss diets on top of that, right? So what would you say would be some of the big mistakes from a dietitian's perspective?
That's a really good question. Now, generally speaking, there's no bad food per se. I know when you open up your socials, you usually see a dude or a dudette speaking to you through your phone in a supermarket and yelling at different types of foods. And well, sometimes you also see those personalities being presented in the government as well, that they are reading out certain ingredients, telling you that if you cannot pronounce it, for example, that it's bad for you, and so on and so forth. And that could not be further from the truth, to be honest. Because if you look at the scientific evidence, what we clearly see is that you can incorporate every food, doesn't matter how harmful it is, into your dietary pattern. Yes, even alcohol, which no amount is safe, but if you have like one glass of wine per month, probably nothing's gonna happen. So we have foods that you should be consuming tons of every single day, and we have foods that you should be limiting. Now, the foods that I mentioned beforehand, like the plant foods, those are foods that you want to incorporate on a daily basis. There's also animal-based foods, of course, that you can incorporate if you want, and those are usually low-fat dairy products, fermented dairy products. We usually recommend around 2 portions per day if you want to incorporate those. By the way, for the vegans watching or hearing, I should say, if you are not, of course, if you're vegan, you're not consuming dairy products anymore, opt for fortified plant alternatives. The fortification is really important.
When you say fermented, you're referring to, so for dairy, it would be like Greek yogurt or something like that.
Exactly, like kefir, for example, certain yogurts or yogurts in general. I think I can just speak from the Swiss perspective, but I'm also highly doubt that. I mean, every yogurt has to be fermented, so there's that. And yeah, exactly. Sauerkraut, for example, but that's not an animal-based, or kombucha, kimchi, etc. Those are
Okay.
usually fermented products, and in the animal dairy department, if you so will, category, what we usually see is like yogurt, we see cheese, for example, or like you mentioned, also Greek yogurt.
Okay. So actually, full disclosure, right? You are vegan.
Yes, I am vegan. And by the way, if regarding meat and other animal-based products, and this is probably a good segue. So
Yeah.
for if you allow me to finish my answer, um, the thing is that you usually hear that, well, you're vegan and you're biased, and to that I have to say we are all biased, because I could say the same thing about others. Well, you're a meat eater and you're biased. That's not really a good argument in any direction you want to point at. So That is why we have to look at the science objectively, at the totality of science. And that is not just focusing on one study, but at all the studies that have been published. Now, circling back to the animal products, what you usually also see is that, for example, things like fish, especially fatty fish, is constantly associated with positive health outcomes. And yes, I can say that as a vegan. I mean, I can wish and tell you that every single gram of animal products are bad, but low fat dairy, fermented dairy products, or fatty fish is constantly associated with either neutral or good positive health outcomes. Red meat, on the other hand, we have to basically specify what we mean with red meat. So either unprocessed red meat and processed red meat. Processed red meat is where we start seeing risk rise in chronic diseases when you start consuming around 30, 50 grams of processed red meat per day. And unprocessed red meat is usually when we start looking at like double that, at 100 grams red meat per day. That's where we start seeing chronic risk rise. So even if you want to incorporate some red meat, like some healthy dietary pattern, like the Mediterranean diet, you want to limit that, but you can still have it in your diet if you want to.
So, no, I heard you say at the beginning, in terms of the choice that people are making, it's really from a environmental and ethical as well as health, but there's other considerations that go into making that choice. So, at least that's my understanding. I am still an omnivore.
And that is great. I love that we are having these discussions. So I appreciate coming on your podcast. And just to specify, when someone tells you I'm vegan, what they usually mean is they are speaking from you from an ethical perspective. So they are vegan for the animals. Vegans don't see animals as objects or slaves that should be abused, and that's it. So vegans can be healthy, but they can also eat, chips, certain Oreos and ice creams and whatever, and not really care about their health. So it's not really saying much about their health.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, there's basically that, like the definition of what the vegan is. But to add to the confusion, if you read the scientific paper, they usually refer to vegans or kind of like fully 100% strictly plant-based diets as vegan diets. So that's why a lot of people associate veganism with the diet alone. And it's not nobody's fault. And I mean, honestly, I don't really care that much. But
Yeah.
if someone asks me directly, like, what is a vegan? That's usually what a vegan is.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting the narratives that are created to to really further a particular agenda in a lot of cases because like when I was asking you about a healthy eating pattern, it's actually pretty boring to talk
Yeah.
in terms of eat your fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds and legumes and all that. Um, Not too much processed food, although I think it would be interesting for us to talk a little bit about what it actually means to be processed because technically frozen peas are processed, right?
Exactly.
Versus
So,
a, yeah.
yeah, exactly. So there's actually a great study that has come out that just like it was, I don't recall the number. I believe they created a diet that consisted of 80 or 90% out of the processed foods basically. And what they basically did was they wanted to show you that even with processed foods, you can eat nutrient dense foods. And they achieved pretty much all the nutritional targets, like all the RDAs and AIs for certain nutrients that are out there, which is really interesting. Now, when we talk about processed foods, the most common food system or classifications of processed foods that get cited is the NOVA scoring system, the NOVA basically classification, and it usually divides them into four different categories. So we have the unprocessed or minimally processed foods. We have the processed with culinary ingredients such as salts, for example, And then we have the processed foods that that are usually like canned beans, for example, some cheese, wine. And then we have the ultra processed foods, which are usually your junk foods, but also certain dairy alternatives, certain plant-based milk alternatives, depending what you're adding in. So the NOVA classification has been a topic of debate for quite some time now. And honestly, if you look at processed foods, tofu is processed. Tempeh is processed. Even fermentation is processed as well. So we should be careful not to put all the processed foods and lump them in together into one huge category. Instead,
Yeah.
avoid all the processed foods because that would lead you down to follow a very restrictive dietary pattern, which is also unnecessary because we know certain foods are very health promoting, such as oats. Other cereals as well, whole grain breads, for example, can be really great for your health as well, and so on and so forth. So that's basically the NOVA system is usually the one that gets cited all the time, but I think it's time to create a new classification system because even scientists still use it because it's the only one we have to classify it. But I feel like most scientists agree that it should be replaced with something better.
So I was talking earlier about how the healthy eating pattern is kind of on the boring side, right? So I actually find folks are trying to almost look for the silver bullet, like, oh, what's the one thing? What's the one thing? And the answer ends up being there's no one thing. We want a pattern, so to speak. Otherwise, you end up going down like, oh, this is a superfood. Well, yeah, you can eat lots of green leafy vegetables, but that's still not enough to have a healthy eating pattern, right? So you've mentioned studies quite a few times. And when I look at your social media feed, you're always helping people really understand the science behind stuff. Excuse me. So
No worries.
I am wondering if you could spend a few minutes to really educate us. Like when you're looking at a study, what questions do you ask? What do you look for?
I love that question, Amy, because it's something that is actually really hard to do. I'm still learning to this day how to read and interpret studies. I personally think it's really hard to do, but as I'm basically laying down the points I'm looking out for when I'm reading a study, hopefully you and your listeners will start to appreciate how hard it is to sometimes interpret results of certain studies. So when I'm opening up a study, one of the first points that I'm looking out for to seek an answer is the question, like, what is the study trying to answer? Then I'm shifting to the design. Is it a randomized controlled trial? Is it observational, so a prospective cohort study, for example, a cross-sectional study? Is it prospective? Is it retrospective? Because depending on the design, this already changes how we interpret the results. For example, a cross-sectional, as the name implies, is a snapshot in time. So data was taken at one point in time, and later down the road, so to give you an example, sticking to nutritional science, let's just say I took your diet 10 years ago, and now I'm looking for, and you're part of this little group, you're one of the participants in the cross-sectional study. So when I'm looking at you and all the other participants, I'm seeing that people eating an omnivorous diet developed, I don't know, disease XYZ more. Now, this is hypothesis generating, but it's not really, we don't have a lot of confidence behind these results because in 10 years, one can change their diet quite many times. So it's pretty hard to do. So a prospective cohort study would probably be increase our confidence. in where we basically send you the newest ones, at least, send you food frequency questionnaire to ask about your diet and dietary patterns, like 2 to 4 years, every 2 to 4 years. The next point is participants. So who was included in this study and who was excluded? Like, if we have a study done on Italians, and just Italians, like I'm Italian myself, and for example, showing that pasta has caused weight gain, how much can we replicate these results to Americans and Asian populations, for example? So, and maybe we should also be looking out for the characteristics of the participants included. Like, if everybody has type 2 diabetes, is it generalizable? Are the results generalizable to the whole population? Also to the ones that don't have type 2 diabetes, for example? So it's really something that you have to read the study and you have to look out for a lot of different points. And the next point is probably one of the most important points when it comes to nutrition science: the exposure and the comparators. So what is, I'm just making something up now, what is butter? Like, butter is back. That's one of the headlines.
Right.
Like something you might have heard as well. So, and by the way, I'm making this up. So butter is back. And butter showed in our study no significant differences, no significant differences in cardiovascular disease, etc., etc. But when you look at the study design, we compared butter to refined carbs. And by the way, those studies also exist, and they didn't find any association. So I wouldn't say butter is back, because if you see null associations between refined carbs like donuts, cereals with tons of sugar in it, and so on and so forth, and we don't see anything like a decrease in risk or an increase in risk, it basically tells you that butter is probably just as healthy as, refined carbs. So it's not really speaking for the health benefits of butter, that is. So compared to what is really important in nutritional science. And of course, we also have to look at the outcomes. Were the outcomes pre-specified? Randomized control trials are not all, but probably tons nowadays, or the vast majority of it, has to, for example, clinical trials have to pre-specify their primary outcomes at clinicaltrials.gov. And if you look at those studies, you sometimes see that, and I'm now making this up again, your primary outcome, your pre-specified primary outcome was butter consumption and LDL. But all I see is in the results section, you mentioning butyrate, like a fatty acid being present in butter, and mentioning some mechanistic outcomes, like how that can alter your gut microbiome, and just mentioning a bunch of other kind of like things you did. And that's usually a red flag, and usually should not pass peer review, but sometimes it does.
So when you talk about outcomes, let's just unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Mechanistic outcomes versus what?
So usually it's when I'm mentioning mechanistic outcomes, is a mechanistic study is, for example, if you eat refined sugar, like table sugar, for example, and you measure your blood sugar levels, the blood sugar levels start to rise. That's a mechanistic outcome. However, an outcome in the long-term sense, like health outcomes, that's what we care about actually, primarily, is if what happens to people that are exposed to table sugar over a prolonged period of time. Randomized control trials usually span over a few months, some even a couple of years, but those are really rare, to be honest. And prospective cohort studies usually span like decades. So depending on the design, we can try to answer different questions as well. And mechanistic data is hypothesis generating, but we should not put a lot of confidence behind mechanistic data, because, and I'm posing you now a question, would you do something almost on a daily basis that raises your blood pressure, increases your inflammation markers, increases oxidative stress, for example, inside your body, and can also increase your blood sugar levels. Would you do that on a daily basis?
Well, I kind of know the answer
You probably
because I
know it.
know I happen to know that exercise, a bout of
Exactly.
exercise does that. So, yeah.
Exactly. That's one of my favorite examples to bring up. So, of course, everybody hopefully knows that, of course, you can also overdo it with exercise,
Sure.
but exercising is really health promoting. However, it does raise inflammation markers temporarily, but it changes your body to be, more resilient and healthier in the long term. And that's why we are seeking out health outcomes, because if we were just focusing on mechanistic data, we would not recommend to train, which is a silly thing to say,
Yeah.
to be honest.
So actually, while we're talking about all this, because you had a recent post about protein, and I really actually personally am at the point where I get very mixed information about how much protein we really want to shoot for. So, what would be your take on how much protein we're supposed to be consuming?
So, that also depends on the individual.
Sure.
The RDA for protein is zero point 0.8 grams per 1 kilogram of body weight. For all Americans listening, 1 kilogram is 2.2 pounds. So I'm bad at maths, sorry about that. uh, I'm not sure to what that translated, but on average, Americans are eating, and also here in Europe, we are probably eating around 1.0, 1.1 to 1.2 grams per 1 kilogram of body weight. So we are well above the RDA. And that is exactly why you don't actually see anybody walking around with protein deficiency, at least in our countries. Now, usually that RDA has been put into question. And if you listen or if you read the scientific papers, it's recommended to probably stick to around 1.1, 1.2 grams per 1 kilogram of body weight, just to be safe. Especially as we get older, we tend to we produce less stomach acid, which is really important to denature proteins as well, and thus we absorb less proteins and so on and so forth. So that's why a lot of scientists are recommending to pump up actually and on proteins a little bit more. So, but most people are already eating in what is probably going to be newly recommended. Now, regarding muscle growth, because when we talk about proteins,
Mm-hmm.
reminiscent if we don't talk about muscle growth as well. What we usually see there is the cutoff for optimal protein intake if you're not on a diet, like a very, very excessive diet, so a very aggressive cut. 1.5, 1.6 grams per 1 kilogram of body weight is usually recommended. Yes, you can shoot for 2 grams, especially if you're on aggressive cuts. It's probably safer to go for 2 or even a little bit above. But it's usually not recommended because what we see is diminishing results if you go above like 1.1, 1.6 grams of protein per 1 kilogram of
Mm.
body weight. So there's a curve that goes up like this with muscle growth. And then it basically becomes a little bit stagnant after that. Some might still profit from going above that, but I personally eat around 1.6 grams of protein per 1 kilogram of body weight, basically. And that is also I
Are
recommend.
you looking at your current body weight, or I've also heard folks say to base it on the ideal body weight?
Fabulous question. Yes, it's usually based on your quote unquote ideal body weight. I don't actually like that term
Yeah, I don't
that
either,
much,
but
but it's usually based on that. So let's just say you are an individual who's overweight. So you're 5'6" and you're 220 pounds, for example, and you wanna cut down some weights. I would not base my protein intake on your current body weight then. I would probably base it on something that you think is more ideal or more appropriate. So the vast majority of people, by the way, land somewhere in between 130 and 150 grams of protein or even less, depending on your body weight. So it's not like you have to eat 200 grams of protein on a daily basis. That seems excessive. Again, it's not going to hurt you. It's not going to hurt your kidneys if you have healthy functioning kidneys. But yeah, it's certainly something that is kind of expensive to do because from all the macronutrients, so protein, fats, and carbs, proteins tend to usually be the foods, high in protein tends to be the ones that are the most expensive.
Yeah. So when we look at protein, are there like specific studies that you would recommend folks if they were going to take the time to try to understand that you would recommend they go and take a look at? So ultimately, I want to teach people how to fish, not fish for them. So I think one of the reasons I'm asking these questions about how to look at studies, or at least who to listen to, if you don't have it in you to take a look at a study, and as you were saying, like still learning how to actually interpret what the results are, who who to trust. What are some of the things that you look for when you're, because there's just so many influencers out there that ultimately what I'm trying to do is help folks understand and think critically about what they're hearing. So, do you have any recommendations there?
Yeah, actually, what I recommend is three studies that have been released the past 4 years. These studies have shifted my belief that plant proteins are quote unquote inferior to animal based proteins to like, no, they're actually pretty much on equal ground if you reach the threshold of around 1.5, 1.6 grams of protein. So these are the studies like Montaigne et al. 2023. Heavy Lorraine, that study was published in 2021, I believe, and K. Roberts swap meat athlete trial. So they all looked at strictly plant-based diets versus omnivorous diets from different angles, if you so will.
Okay. And I'll
But
be sure to include links in the description and stuff.
I can
So
send
people can,
I can
okay.
send you the studies, no problem.
Okay.
Absolutely. And so basically, to summarize all these studies, there were no statistical significant differences between people in the plant-based group, or some even habitual vegans were recruited in performance, strength, and muscle growth. And these studies lasted, I believe, if I recall correctly, 10 to 12 weeks, basically. So 10 to 12 weeks. So yeah, those are usually the studies that I recommend reading. There's other meta-analyses that have come out in the past few years, but the three latest meta-analyses that I've read are basically all recommend 1.5, 1.6 grams, and I believe one of the oldest recommended 1.5 grams of protein per 1 kilogram of body weight, suggesting that if you consume that much protein, you're basically quote unquote optimizing your muscle growth. And yes, sometimes I'm getting asked, have these studies been done on enhanced athletes? No, usually just folks like you and I have been recruited. So also trained and untrained people. So it's a
Okay.
mixture of both, basically. So that's why we can have or can say with huge confidence or with a good amount of confidence that 1.5 1.6 should be the protein target that you should be aiming for if your goal is maximizing your performance and muscle growth.
Okay.
um, you also mentioned something else like who can we trust nowadays, and that opens up a topic that we can probably make an entire podcast about. But usually people, if you follow people that speak in absolute terms, that's a huge red flag. Science is never 100% confident, almost never. Like, if you read the papers, scientists always use vague language. oh, it may lead, or we need further studies to show this, this, and this,
Right.
or
Suggests, indicates.
exactly, exactly. So if you have someone yelling at you like, oh, and blah 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 blah, they lied to you for whatever reason. They probably sometimes they know what they're talking about, but they put specifically like a certain spin of it, of certain statements, and the most dangerous one are the ones that are actually telling half truths. Actually, so they always have a nickel of truth in their
Hmm.
statements, but the rest of it is completely wrong or misleading. So absolute terms or being in a supermarket, usually those are the peoples that I would not recommend following.
Just, well, I think it's at some level, I feel like it's when they're trying to be polarizing, I think that's where science is very nuanced. It's really very measured. It's very curious. I think people who come across to me as being more curious, like this is what the data does tell us. Here are the questions that it raises, right? The whole idea around, well, you need to study this further because it really, I think the folks that are being absolutists tend to extrapolate the data quite a bit, right? And start saying this in this particular case did this, and so now we're going to make it apply to everything. I kind of get that sense.
Yeah, they are usually cherry picking data and they're really good storytellers. Like are they're telling you stories that are easy to grasp. For example, like we used to evolve eating meat. I'm just, something you hear online all the time. Yeah, but we also evolved, drinking contaminated water, and it's probably not the best thing to do. It's easy to pick out certain things that goes along with your agenda, while not talking about all the other things. Now, a paper, for example, that gets cited by a lot of people suggesting that saturated fat is not the villain in your diet is a paper released by Siri Torino. And what they usually did is like they included a lot of studies that have adjusted for cholesterol. Now, adjusting is when you are basically adjusting for confounding factors. The best example I can give you is really early studies linked coffee consumption to lung cancer. But once the researcher adjusted for cigarettes or smoking, that association, that link went away, basically. So that is what adjusting usually means in very, very simple terms. Now, what that paper did is we know that cholesterol in your blood, for example, like is causally associated for especially LDL and ApoB are causally associated with like the higher number, the higher risk is. It's like almost like it's a log linear relationship, if you so will. Now, what they did is they just included studies in their analysis that not just, but a lot of the studies included adjusted for cholesterol, which is basically the thing that, increases the risk. So saturated fats, the mechanism behind why saturated fats, excess saturated fats, which is above 8-9% of your total energy, of your intake, basically increases your risk for cardiovascular disease. It does so by downregulating your LDL receptors in your liver and also increasing the output of LDL cholesterol. So that's why in most people, in general, LDL starts to rise, LDL cholesterol in your blood. Now, if you adjust for LDL cholesterol, for example, you're eliminating the thing that basically causes cardiovascular disease. And they just included these studies. Now, if you don't know this and you read the study, you're like, well, this study shows, no significant differences or no association between high saturated fat consumption and cardiovascular disease. And this study shows something else. I don't know to believe. So these people purposely create doubt. However, and this is why it's important, one study is never conclusive. You want to see these results being replicated by different teams of scientists in different demographics, and so on and so forth. So replication is a part of the scientific method and a crucial part. So everybody that picks out one study and shows it in your face and tells you like, see, butter is back, or the vegan diet is the best diet out there, there will never be another better diet than the vegan diet, and so on and so forth. No, that's not how science usually works, and that's also a huge red flag. So it's really complicated to discern from the studies alone who is representing the totality of evidence correctly if you're not well versed with, for example, nutrition science.
Yeah, it makes it tough. It really does make it tough for folks to figure out for themselves what are the right. Ultimately, it's the trying to make healthy choices. I think one of the things I always really try to focus on is to not major in the minor. So if you focus on the big things, getting enough fruits and vegetables, eating the color of the rainbow, right? All of that stuff, that's going to take you a lot further than trying to decide, like, are seed oils bad for me? They've become a thing. I don't know
Yeah.
why they became a thing, but they became a thing. So you did, when we were talking about protein and you were talking about the recommendations and the, the, the studies, I guess one of the things that has actually been a narrative has been the the number of studies that have really only been looking at men versus looking at men and women. So I think as we're sort of nearing the end of this episode, I'm wondering if you could maybe make some distinctions in terms of specific nutrition and maybe even exercise recommendations for men versus women. Like, are there some differences?
You are speaking about something that is a little bit disheartening because research is slowly getting better. But yeah, women are underrepresented in studies. That's a statistical fact, actually. So there, I'm speaking in absolutes. But that's really like something you can measure. The good thing, however, is that women are recommended to just train if they have the same goals, just train as men do, actually. So the protein intake is pretty much the same, and also how they should be training is pretty much the same. So if you start looking at muscle growth or protein intake, it's usually always come up back to the same numbers: 1.5, 1.6 grams of protein per 1 kilogram of body weight. But of course, it's really important to not just up your protein intake, you have to do something. Your muscles and your bones are made out of cells, and these cells like to be hella stimulated. Like, they love it. They want to be stimulated. I know that sounds a little bit weird, but that's actually really important because we have, I believe it was a study out of Japan that basically showed that if you just up your protein intake a little bit, or not a little bit, if you up your protein intake, nothing happens with muscle growth. Nothing. Nada. Literally, it doesn't move the needle. But if you up your protein intake and you add some resistance training in, that's where we start to see the muscle growth happen, actually. So you have to move your body. You have to find something that, like a cardio activity, an aerobic activity that you love doing. Doesn't matter whatever it is. Something that keeps basically, or allows you to create a habit that you love doing. And the same goes for resistance training. And you also don't have to do a lot. Like, we don't have to look like bodybuilders and train as such. No, you actually just being a little bit consistent And I mean, you, Amy, you've been part of the retreat that we mentioned at the beginning, and I had the honor to be one of the speakers. What I wanted to show to people is how little goes a long way, basically,
Yeah.
because you can even do some exercise snacks that you spread your small workout routine, a couple of exercises like 2 to 3 minutes. So maybe you are doing 2 minutes exercises in the morning, another 2 minutes in the afternoon, and one in the evening. So it's basically 6 minutes of training. And that can have a tremendous impact on a lot of chronic diseases. You almost wouldn't believe how little you have to do to create such a huge effect. So it all depends on being honest to yourself, having an honest conversation with yourself, and trying to be consistent. And also, don't force yourself into something that you don't like. If you don't like the gym, train from home. If you don't like training from home, go outside or do something else that you like doing. So that's probably the most important factor here. But the good thing is, it doesn't matter if you are a woman or you're a man. The same goes for both. However, women undergo something called the menopause, which is usually defined as when the ovaries stop releasing eggs and menstrual periods have been absent for 12 months. That usually happens at the age of like around 50 plus minus. And then there's something happens inside the body. So usually we see a big drop in estrogen and progesterone. So those are usually hormones that regulate the cycles, bone, brain, and certain heart metabolic health factors as well. There we have to be a little bit more specific. So the dietary recommendations for those women is usually the same. A diet rich in plants, a plant dominant diet, and like whether it's a Mediterranean type of diet or a DASH diet, which is short for dietary approach to stop hypertension, and other kind of like healthy dietary patterns, doesn't matter, but the focus there is clearly on vitamin D3 and calcium. So you want to up your calcium to the recommended RDA of 1.1 grams or 1.2 grams of calcium on a daily basis. And that is also for your bone health as well. That's really important. Why? Well, calcium we know why, but why vitamin D3? Vitamin D3 helps you absorb calcium better. That's why it's recommended as well for women in that undergo the menopause or also perimenopause, basically.
Is it better via supplementation, or is it better through the actual food that we eat?
Yeah, so we have to differentiate between vitamin D3 and calcium. Maybe let's start with vitamin D3. The easiest way is to supplement it. Like vitamin D3 is called the sun vitamin. So when UVB radiation touches your skin, your body starts producing a vitamin D3 on its own. It's basically the only vitamin that we can basically make on our own. However, that depends on where you live and how much you are exposing your skin to sunlight, which is not always maybe the healthiest thing to do. So I, for example, am someone that lives in the northern part of the globe. So even if I were to, now we are basically slowly going into winter season. Now, if I'm stepping outside, the radiation being kind of like excreted from the sun is too weak to insinuate the vitamin D production, even if I'm spending an hour outside. Usually it's recommended to spend 20 minutes. So it's not something that I would do. So it's way easier to maybe just take a vitamin D3 supplement. What we recommend is 800 international units up to 2000 international units. But that recommendations may change depending on your health status and if you are suffering from certain chronic diseases, especially related to the digestive tract.
Should people get tested for their levels before supplementing?
Yeah, they can actually test vitamin D3. Vitamin D3 tests in the blood are very, very telling of your vitamin D status in your blood. However, I would not do the same for calcium because calcium is very highly regulated actually by also your thyroid hormones, for example, and other organs as well. So I would not do that with calcium. With calcium, I would just make sure to get to 1.1 to 1.2 grams of calcium on a daily basis. You can do so with supplementing. However, stay away from super highly dosed supplements because we have studies that show that if you reach, especially with supplementation, a daily target of 2.2, 2.4, well, we see some increase happening, especially when it comes to your heart and certain diseases. So I would not go that far, to be honest. Just measure your calcium intake once and try to get it. See how much calcium you are consuming on a daily basis. And if you struggle, one of my most favorite way to get calcium in is actually mineral water. Especially one, I personally drink a brand that has per 1 liter around 470-ish milligrams of calcium per 1 liter. And I'm drinking water anyway. So that might be a feasible and easy way to get your calcium in. But of course, dairy products are also a great source, especially like we mentioned before, the fermented ones and the low-fat ones. But also some plant-based alternatives nowadays are fortified with calcium. And that's why I mentioned in the beginning, it's really important to opt for the fortified versions of the plant-based alternatives. Yeah, you can get your calcium intake up also without eating these foods that I mentioned. It's just going to be really hard, to be honest. Like certain vegans opt and tell you or recommend kale usually, and 100 grams of kale, which is a lot. I mean, I love kale, but I would struggle to consume 100 grams of kale on a daily basis. Gives you around 1/4 of calcium of the RDA, of the recommended dietary allowance. So it's harder to get there without fortified foods or
Okay.
mineral water.
Okay. Or mineral water. I have not heard that recommendation. So that's something new.
Yeah, it's not a common one, to be honest. But yeah, make sure to read the label. It needs to be stated how much calcium is in there, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. As I was listening to you talk about eating protein, this picture like formed in my head of someone getting like a delivery of bricks. But like yeah, so you have the bricks now, but you're not it doesn't automatically turn into a house. There's something that needs to happen. You start needing to lay the bricks to have a house. So I think at some level it's that moving your body and the resistance training. I'm going way back in the conversation, but I wanted to sort of bring that up because we traveled down the road and talked about some other stuff. But to the extent that whatever you're eating, ultimately your body is using. This is everything we're talking about here in terms of the healthy eating pattern is really giving your body what it needs to then build, right? So I guess to that extent that the metaphor still works in this particular spot in the podcast. We're everything we're talking about here is about giving our body what it needs in order to build, to grow, to be healthy, to function optimally. Anything else you
Love
want
it.
to add?
Love it. No, I love that analogy. And circling back, like you did right now, I mentioned vitamin D3, calcium being important after menopause, during menopause, after menopause. Nothing happens, however, if you don't do resistance training, or not much. So doing resistance training is, remember the protein example I just gave earlier. If you just up your protein intake, nothing really happens with your muscles or with your muscle growth. The same goes with your bones, because if you are doing resistance training, guess what lies underneath your muscles? It's your bones, and they also love to be stimulated as well. So resistance training is really, really important, and it's also never too late to start. Like if you are a woman that is basically past her menopause, has never trained her whole life. You would be surprised how much you can actually achieve if you start today or tomorrow. But just start and have fun, because training is a lot of fun. And if you never had fun training, you never basically have found the right training for you.
Yeah. Well, and I would actually say there's a little bit about mindset as well. So, one of the things you said at the very beginning is how much you love eating healthy and how much you love exercising. And I think a lot of that has to do with the association people make. It's kind of like if you've been struggling to go to sleep, do you look at your bed as a place where you're going to get rest, or do you see it as a battleground? So I think that relationship we have with food and with exercise, I do think that finding things that you enjoy is a key part of it. And maybe for food, it's like exploring different recipes. So, one of the things I'll do is maybe give a link to folks for some of my favorite recipes so that they're healthy and on top of it, they're good for you, right? And they taste great. So, maybe that can help move folks into that sort of lane as opposed to, oh, I have to exercise in order to lose weight. That would be one of the things that really doesn't help us when it comes to actually falling in love with the process.
Exactly. Like you, just to add to that, you truly have to find an intrinsic motivation, basically, for
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
It's maybe it's your kids, maybe it's your grandkids, maybe it's for the future or with your loved ones that you want to be there for them. And I also had clients telling me like, "Hey, honestly, I just want to start exercising in order to be able to play with my grandkids."
Yeah.
Or with
Yeah.
my knees a little bit better, and not getting out of breath as soon as I'm, like playing with her like for 1 minute or something. So find an intrinsic motivation for yourself. That's the most important and key part, because that's what keeps you going and going and going. And it's not like keep going in the sense that you have to do something that you don't like. Creating new habits, especially moving our body, is it's not it's usually harder to do, because we are, from an evolutionary standpoint, we are lazy creatures. Basically, like yeah, we like to move our bodies, yeah, absolutely. But once our body recognizes that we don't have to move our bodies, our body goes into energy saving mode, basically. So
Yeah.
that is an evolutionary trait that has helped us back in the day. Like, because if you didn't had to hunt or gather, like hunter gatherers, because you have plenty to eat in front of you, you're just going to stock up energy for the periods where you don't have a lot to eat. So it's natural for us to be wired in a sense that as soon as we are doing something that is physically very active or intensive, it's hard to kind of like tell the brain like, no, I want to do this. I want to do this. Like, your brain is telling you probably like, what the hell are you doing? Or you go back to your couch. So that's why it's important to find a motivation whenever you're getting these thoughts, because these thoughts happen. They happen.
Yeah.
They sometimes still happen to me, and I've been training consistently for, I don't know, 18, 19 years now. I can't recall anymore. It's been that long. But sometimes also when I'm training, these thoughts come to my mind, like, what you're doing, go back, do something else that requires less energy. But it's fun to push back and see how far you can actually come.
Yeah. It builds confidence when you see yourself. Yeah. Yeah. So, for folks who would like to learn more about you and learn from you, where would you recommend they go?
Probably to my Instagram page, so
Okay.
you can find me at Luca underline fit health. And yeah, basically follow me there. I also have a YouTube channel, but I'm not posting as regularly as I should on there, to be honest. But I try to be more. I'm trying to be active on my socials, especially on Instagram.
His feed is amazing. I every time I
Oh,
go to
thank
your page, I end up like, oh wait, I haven't seen this post yet. Let me watch this one too.
you. Thank you, Amy. That means a lot.
So, all right, well, how about we land this plane? I like to say landing the plane. As my guest, I have a tradition of ending the podcast with a quote. So, do you have a quote that inspires you or motivates you, something that you would like to share with folks? And you can take us out with it.
Thank you for allowing me to have the honor to land this very important plane. And thank you for having me on this plane and also being one of the pilots that lands this plane. It's been a pleasure, Amy. So one of my favorite quotes is from Michael Pollan. It basically summarizes nutritional science, which is a very complex. It's very complex science, in one short sentence. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And
Yeah. How do I pronounce your name properly?
so my name is pronounced Pasquariello.
Oh, I am not going
So
to get those
it's
R's.
yeah, it's a mouthful. So it's if you can say Pasquariello, something like that, it's
Okay.
totally fine. I mean, I don't mind either way. So Pasquariello, you don't even have to say Riello, Riello.
Without my morning coffee yet. That's not how. So,